Hello and welcome to Alyssa Jean's Reviews, and welcome back to my Star Trek Top 100. This is my video for my number 4. You should check out all of my previous videos, but if you haven't, I will put numbers 100 through 5 in the description below. I kind of forgot to do that for my number 5 video, but I could always retroactively go back and do that. In that case, it would be numbers 100 through 6. Here, you can look and see numbers 100 through 5, but you should also go and watch all of those videos. There's a playlist on my channel with all my Star Trek Top 100 videos. So here we are, all the way up at number 4, and I'll start with the picture clue reveal. So last week I showed you a picture clue that revealed what this episode was if you could get the clue. And so at this point, as I am recording this, only one person got it correct, and that was my brother Mark from Enchantment of Eternity, though he did not post the answer in the comments itself. He wanted to give other people a chance to get it. He did message me privately, and he did have the correct answer and the correct reasoning, but I kind of knew he would. The thing is about Mark is that he has deduced what my final 4 episodes are based on process of elimination, so he could just look at those 4 and go, okay, which one makes the most sense for this picture? And at that point, it's super easy, barely an inconvenience. He also knows me, and I did say in my picture clue video that knowing a little bit about me does help in this picture clue. So he had the advantage. And I'm just going to say the last 3 picture clues that I'm going to do, Mark is definitely going to know them. And I do encourage him to still tell me, and I will still give him shout outs, but I'm hoping other people will also get them as well. And for this one, you can still get a shout out. Because I'm recording this on Sunday night, and Mark at this point is the only one who got the correct answer. But if somebody were to give me the correct answer between Sunday night when I'm recording this and Friday when the video is actually released, you will get a shout out in the next picture clue video. So there's still time as I'm recording this. Although if you're watching this, then there is no more time because I'm about to give you the answer. So let's look at the picture clue. Once again, there's me. I'm thinking about some things here, So I'm thinking about some pizza, a dog, this beautiful mountain forest scene, the band Fish, that is the rock band Fish, and some lipstick. I kind of read this even further into not just lipstick, but just makeup in general, and then taking it the next step. It represents my transition and what I love about my transition, and the fact that I finally get to wear makeup for the first time, and something I've always wanted to do. So, but you don't have to know any of that stuff. You could just know that this is lipstick, and you can still get the correct answer. So, what do these things mean to me? What do I think of these things? Pizza, dogs, mountain forest, the band Fish, makeup, transition, that sort of thing. What are these things to me? To me, these things are all good things. They're all good things. And that brings me to my number 4 all good things from Star Trek The Next Generation. In fact, it is the series finale of Star Trek The Next Generation, and it is all the way up at number 4. It is in my top 5. Not only is it the greatest series finale in Star Trek, it is the greatest series finale in all of television history, in my opinion, and it is one of the greatest episodes in the Star Trek franchise. In fact, I've got it ranked as the 4th greatest episode in the Star Trek franchise. Now, what this episode did so well, why it is considered by me to be the greatest series finale of all time, and number 4 in my Star Trek Top 100, is that it was able to wrap up the character stories in a satisfying and meaningful way, in a way that was consistent with the previous 7 seasons. And they did something that's hard to do. They dipped back into nostalgia. They went back to the very first episode of the series and pulled it off. And they tied it all together and made it work. With so many times when series finales try to dip into nostalgia, more often than not, like almost 99% of the time, I feel like it's just going to fail. They're just not going to do it. Where this actually did it in a meaningful way, a way that was meaningful for the characters, a way that was meaningful for the fans, and not just simple fan service, not just simple, oh, remember that? Remember when we did that? Oh, that was back in the first season, remember? This actually was meaningful to the characters, and therefore meaningful to the audience. And it is so rare that a show is able to pull this off. And then there's that ending scene, of course, is one of the greatest ending scenes in a series of all time. It was a perfect way to wrap everything up. And I will talk about that ending scene much later in this video, because I am going to go through this episode scene by scene and do a full recap. So I'll get into more why I think that's one of the greatest ending scenes of all time when I get there, about like an hour from now or something. I don't know how long this is going to take, but it's going to be a while. I keep doing these 2-parters, so I'm going through recaps. 2-parters are 2-hour episodes. So last week's was The Best of Both Worlds, which was the 2-parter, and this is another 2-hour episode. Promise 1 through 3. Spoiler alert, not 2-hour episodes, but it takes me a while to get through them. So with that being said, let me go ahead and just dive into my recap. And I'm going to go through each scene. I'm also going to talk about, as I go, why I loved these scenes, why I love this episode. I may point out some little nitpicks that I don't like, although obviously it doesn't hurt the episode that much. And one thing that I am going to do, it's something that I discovered I was thinking a lot about as I was rewatching this episode and I was taking notes on it, is that I found myself drawn to this idea of this All Good Things future timeline and how it compares to the prime timeline that we have now seen in Star Trek Picard. And so I am going to be talking about that a lot. It doesn't necessarily say anything toward why this is one of the greatest episodes or why it's number 4, but it's a topic that's very interesting to me. And so I will be doing a lot of those comparisons. And I think that by and large, Star Trek Picard did an excellent job of pulling from All Good Things while not repeating it. It is actually stated at the very end of this episode that was an alternate timeline, and that they now have their future in their own hands, and they can make their future whatever they want. And we do see that played out in Star Trek Picard, but there's a lot of things that are similar, a lot of things that are taken from this episode. And for the most part, with one exception, they do an excellent job. And the one exception comes from Picard Season 2, which we would just want to forget that even exists. But I do have to talk about it when we get there, because there is one thing that they fucking ruined from this episode, but it's Star Trek Picard Season 2 that did it. I actually think Seasons 1 and 3 of Picard do an excellent job of drawing from All Good Things while not directly repeating it. So I will be talking about that as I go through the future timeline, because I can't help myself. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. This has been a long intro So now let us get into the recap. We'll start with the beginning of the episode. Okay, so the episode begins, unfortunately, with Worf and Counselor Troy, notoriously one of the worst romances in Star Trek. I had it in my worst romance list. I can't remember where it was. It was in the top 5. It wasn't number 1 because that's Chakotay and 7 and 9, but it was in there. And unfortunately, that is the one black mark on this episode, though obviously not enough to keep it out of my top 5. But this whole storyline with Worf and Riker, I think it kind of comes out of nowhere. And then it looks silly in retrospect because the Worf and Deanna romance just gets completely dropped and forgotten about, as it should. But we'll talk more about that as we go. Don't want to get too bogged down on that right now because we get this great scene with Picard coming out in, like, I guess it's his pajamas, I think. But it's the same outfit he wore to Risa. I don't know. It's his relaxing clothes. I don't know. He comes out and tells Troy and Worf that he is moving back and forth through time. And then we get the credits. And I love this hook. This is such a great way to open the episode where Picard is already traveling through time. We don't get this, I don't know, mundane scene where Picard is sitting there drinking his Earl Grey, and then all of a sudden he starts traveling through time. Like, oh no, I'm traveling through time. I love that it's already happening, and we are thrust right into the middle of it. And we get this introduction by Picard running up to Troy and Worf and telling them this. And then we get the credits. This is a great intro. This episode is already off to a great start. So then, after the credits, Picard is explaining to Deanna about his time traveling, which is introducing the audience to this concept that he's going through 3 separate time periods. And Troy here is being a bitch. She is like being a complete fucking bitch, condescending as fuck, and not believing him. Like, I hate her in this scene. It's not like he has Euromatic syndrome at this point. Like, they don't know about Euromatic syndrome yet. So there's no reason to believe he's senile. And they live in a world, in a universe where time travel and timey-wimey stuff happens all the time. This is a normal thing. Like, there is no reason for her to dismiss him and be like, oh, maybe you just need to get more rest, Captain. Like, fuck you, Troy. Like, she's such a bitch. I hate her in this episode, or in this scene, I should say, rather. She says, oh, maybe it's just a dream. Maybe it's just a dream. You should go get more sleep. Fuck you, Troy. Anyways, so he's telling Troy this, and he gets cut off mid-sentence, and then we see old Picard in the vineyard for the first time. Now, right off the bat, this is one thing that I love that Star Trek Picard drew from this episode, is that Jean-Luc Picard does work at the family vineyard. So I love that because of course he would. Of course he would. Once he retires, why would he do anything else? So I love that Picard, in the very first episode of season 1, they took this right from All Good Things. They didn't take the beard. They didn't need the beard. I like that they left the beard behind. But the fact that he works in the vineyard. So we get this scene where Geordi approaches Picard. Now he reveals here that he's married to Leah Brahms, and I hate that because the way that he first met Leah was very creepy. There's that episode doesn't age well. I think it's a really kind of like bordering on some really sexual harassy type things, very like violating sort of things. So don't love that they decided to marry him to Leah here. But this is a correction Star Trek Picard, I think, makes, because they don't actually say what Geordi's wife's name is in Picard season 3, but they don't say it's Leah. And both of his children appear to be, African American. Like, they don't look like they're mixed race. So I'm kind of going to assume that their mother's not white. So I'm just going to go with the fact that it's not Leah in Star Trek Picard, even though they never specify one way or the other. I'm just going to say that it is. However, his daughter's names, as he tells Picard here in this scene, are the same as they are in Picard season 3, which is Alondra and Sydney. Although here he mentions his son Brent. I can't remember if there was a son mentioned in Picard season 3. Obviously, we didn't see him. We only saw the daughters. I don't remember if one was off-screen. Some off-screen brother of theirs was mentioned. I don't remember that. But at the very least, the daughters' names are the same here. So we get this introduction to the Irumodic syndrome, and so that right away is going to start placing doubt into everyone's mind as to whether Picard really is traveling through time. So the Geordi and Data and Crusher, as we go through this future timeline, have a good reason to doubt Picard, but Troy in the present timeline is just being a bitch. anyways, from here we jump to Tasha Yar on the shuttlecraft prior to the events of the Kenner at Farpoint. And they do the whole big dramatic ship approach like Star Trek the motion picture, but not nearly as drawn out as that really works here. It reminds us that this is Picard's first time going to the Enterprise D, and Tasha Yar is talking it up, or you're going to love the Galaxy class ship and all that. I also want to make a comment that I love that they made Tasha Yar look like the way she did in season 1. And yesterday's Enterprise, she looked completely different. Maybe it was the new 3rd season uniform and the way she had her hair slicked back, but she looks shorter to me in yesterday's Enterprise, where I always thought of her as tall and lanky, and she looks more like season 1 Tasha here. So I love that they returned her to her original look. And then we get back to the present day, where Picard tells Troy that Tasha, I was just with Tasha. He's starting to remember more, whereas the first time he was talking to Troy, he couldn't remember a lot of the details, and that contributed to her being a bitch. But she's still being a bitch right here. She's still not believing him, like, fuck her. Anyways, they do have him checked out by Dr. Crusher. It doesn't seem like she totally believes him either. However, he does ask her to look for signs of Irumodic syndrome, and though she doesn't find Irumodic syndrome specifically, she finds a defect that could potentially lead to a number of neurological disorders, including Irumodic syndrome. So she starts to get worried. So she kind of does believe him a little bit, because she's starting to get worried. Well, what if you did go to the future? What if you did get this syndrome? I'm worried about it. So Crusher believes him at least a little bit, and she gets a little worried, and Picard is reassuring her a little bit. Then we get this call. Picard gets a call from Admiral Nakamura, and we get the main thrust of the plot is being set up now. He tells him about the Romulans all going to the Devron system in the neutral zone, and so that's setting us up for where we are going with this plot. Okay, then we go back to the future, where Picard first really realizes that he had just been in the past, and he's explaining this to Geordi. And as I mentioned earlier, Geordi, of course, thinks he's senile. He thinks it's a part of the Irumodic syndrome, and I don't blame Geordi for this. He's not a bitch like present-day Council Troy. And then this is when Picard starts seeing all those like crazy people from the courtroom, from the Q courtroom from the first episode, where they're all going, rah, 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 and he's like hallucinating. And this is where Geordi agrees to take him to see Data, and Picard says, yes, Data, we'll go see Data. And so they go to Cambridge, where Data is now a professor. And another thing that I really love about this episode is the sense of humor. That there's a lot of great comedic lines, comedic timing between the characters. So one of my favorite jokes in this episode, or moments of levity, I should say, is when Data's maid, I can't remember what her name, Jezebel or something, or Jezza or something like that. His maid comes in and asks Picard if he wants tea, and he goes, tea, Earl Grey, hot. And she goes, of course it's hot. What do you want in it? And he goes, nothing. It reminded me of like a Monty Python exchange, like comedic timing. So good. Of course it's hot. What do you want in it? Okay. Anyways, so we have Data here. He's got this weird like gray hair that gives him an air of distinction, which the maid is like, you look like a damn skunk. Now this, of course, is one of the big differences between this timeline here in All Good Things and the timeline that plays out in the Prime timeline that ends up in Star Trek Picard, is that Data dies in Star Trek Nemesis, whereas in this timeline it's Troy who dies and Data is still alive, but don't know how that quite worked out. We don't know all the details, but it does appear that this is a timeline where Star Trek Nemesis didn't happen, which I gotta say, this is not a bad timeline. This can't be a bad timeline if Nemesis didn't happen, or at least the ending of it didn't happen, because Data is still alive here. Now, of course, we know in real life this was before Nemesis was written, but looking back in retrospect, if you look at it as a different timeline, it's a timeline where Nemesis didn't happen, and that's not a bad thing. I wish I was on the timeline where Nemesis didn't happen. Anyways. So, as they talk through it, Picard is like, you think I'm senile, don't you? And Data says, he admits that the thought had occurred to him, but there's really no harm in exploring it. Why not? And then Picard goes, yes, that's the Data I remember. Then all of a sudden he jumps back to the encounter at Farpoint time period, the first episode of the series, and he just kind of all of a sudden he's there, and I will take this moment to talk about the time jumps. Now is as good a time as any. I want to talk about these at some point because it's part of what makes this episode so great. It is a very effective way of demonstrating time travel and how, and this particular kind of time travel, how off-putting it is, how herky-jerky it is, how it can just be so disconcerting, how it takes Picard a little bit to kind of get grounded a lot of the times. Now this, I think, was first done in the film Slaughterhouse-5, which was based off of the book, and I think it gets famously done a few years after this in the Lost episode, The Constant, with Desmond, which also does it very effectively. And it's been done several times since then in fiction, and I always love this kind of time travel. I think in my number 10 in Visionary and Deep Space Nine, I think kind of like that, but not quite the same thing. Because he's not jumping into himself, he's jumping into watching himself, but it's kind of the same sort of disconcerting sort of thing. But there's other films and shows that have utilized this method of time travel, and it's usually really good. So one of the things that I really love about this episode, so I had to point it out at some point. Now we get back into the plot. So Picard is introducing himself, doing the official ceremony of, I'm the captain now, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. He starts seeing those crazy courtroom people from the Q scenario again. And then he calls Red Alert for no reason. And the crew is like, what is going on here? Now, jumping ahead a little later in this episode, in the present time, he asks Counselor Troy if she remembers that, and she doesn't. She remembers it the way that we saw it in Encounter at Farpoint. And Data points out a discontinuity between the three time periods, which I never quite understood. Like, I don't know. It's kind of weird. It sort of seems like they did it because it was easier from a writing standpoint to do it that way. But there's not really a clear explanation. And then the three ships end up together at the end. So I don't know. I don't quite understand the discontinuity, but it's one of those hand wavy things like, whatever. It's fine. Anyway, so Picard does like the secret log that's encrypted and all this stuff, where he decides, he says in the log that he decides not to tell this crew about his experiences because he doesn't want to give them foreknowledge of the future. Never mind the fact that he tells the present day crew about the future timeline, but whatever. I want to mention here too that I love that they got Cole Meany for this. At this point, he's in Deep Space Nine, and they got him to come over to play Chief O'Brien, even though in Encounter Farpoint, that is definitely not Chief O'Brien. That is just some random dude. I mean, but they didn't ever said it wasn't Chief O'Brien. Like, they never gave him a name, so it's very easy to kind of retcon it into, oh yeah, this was Chief O'Brien. He was at the helm here. And so he still has all this knowledge of engineering and all this stuff that we can utilize, even though he totally didn't in that first episode, because I don't know if the character of Chief O'Brien had even been invented yet. It was just Cole Meany as some random dude. But since they never said he wasn't Chief O'Brien, it's very easy to retcon it, and it's a good retcon. I love it. I love that they do this. So this neutral zone thing that was happening in the present timeline, also happening in this timeline, and he's ordered to go toward the neutral zone, but ignores it because he wants to go to Farpoint to meet Q, because he's seeing all these courtroom people, and he knows Q has something to do with this, so he wants to go ahead and meet Q. Then we jump back to the present again, and then Crusher finds the first actual evidence that he is time traveling, because she points out that he has accumulated 2 days of memories in a matter of minutes. So now Cancel Troy can go fuck off because they have proved it in this timeline, at least. And this is the only timeline that everyone actually believes that he's traveling through time all throughout this episode, because, as I just said, he doesn't even tell the past timeline people about his time travel, and then the future timeline people all think he's going crazy. So we get another scene with this Riker being jealous of Worf thing that came out of nowhere, but I'll get into that later. Okay, next scene, we jump back to the future, where Picard is having a conversation with Geordi, and is telling him that they need to get to the neutral zone because he has seen it in the other two time periods. And Geordi's really hesitant. Eventually, he does say, okay, fine. But he's like, but first of all, there is no more neutral zone. And Picard then remembers, that's right, the Klingons. The Klingons have taken over the Romulan Empire in this time period. So I don't know what it is with Star Trek and wanting to give the Klingons all this power that they don't really ever have in alternate timelines, because there's also in the episode The Visitor, I think probably my least favorite aspect of that episode is that the Dominion is just kind of brushed aside, like they don't exist, and like the Klingons are this all-powerful force now, and they've taken over the station and all of this stuff, which is nonsense. And they do it again here, like the Klingons have conquered the Romulan Empire. The Klingons they don't have their shit together. They have the most dysfunctional government. Like, they're as bad as the U.S. government today. Like, they just, they're all like bogged down in politics and self-motivation and like self-interest. And they can never get their shit together to conquer anyone. So I don't know why in all these alternate timelines, the writers always want the Klingons to be all powerful. Like, no. So this, of course, doesn't happen. And, of course, Romulus gets destroyed in the Prime timeline, which doesn't happen, apparently, in the All Good Things timeline. And this is one of the things I'm kind of glad they changed, because it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me that the Klingons would take over the Romulan Empire. But that is what is happening here in this timeline. So we go ahead and roll with it. So then Picard contacts Admiral Riker, and of course I'm going to compare this Riker to the Picard Season 1 and Picard Season 3 Riker. First of all, he looks way better. Jonathan Frakes looks way better in real life. Like, he's older, but he still looks pretty good. Whereas here, his he's so fakey old. Like they did such a bad job of his makeup. Like I buy Picard being old and Geordi being old, but Riker looks so fakey. The way his hair is like slicked back and like fakey gray, like it's just nobody has hair like that. It just looks so fake. Like this is so. I hate how Riker looks in this episode, but obviously it does not keep it out of my top 4 or my top 5. It's just, aesthetics. And the real life Jonathan Frakes looks way better today. But it is interesting, like that in both timelines, Riker's dealing with some demons. Although I'd say in the Prime timeline, his demons are way more interesting because they have to do with the death of his child and his marriage to Troy and all that stuff, and how he becomes kind of disconnected from the marriage. And that's so much more interesting than this stupid Worf bullshit. And he's a grumpy old man here because of that stupid Worf bullshit, whereas the Picard season 3 Riker has his demons, but still has a sense of humor, still has a personality, and is still a good character. Where here he's just a one-dimensional asshole, and I don't like Riker. In the future timeline episode, I'm glad that real Riker and the Prime timeline is so much better. Anyway, so of course he does deny Picard's request for a ship to take him to the Devron system. And Picard is like, he's been sitting behind that desk too long. And then we move on to Picard's next idea, which is let's get a medical ship. And he's like, oh, I know someone who could get us a medical ship. Let's Data, find the USS Pasteur. I was a little confused as to why Geordi and Data would somehow not be aware that Dr. Crusher, or now Captain Beverly Picard, is the captain of the Pasteur, but Picard knows this. I don't know. I feel like they would know it, but it's not that big of a deal. Anyways, they go to the USS Pasteur. We see future Dr. Crusher for the first time, and it is revealed that they were once married, but they got divorced. Now, not too dissimilar from what actually happens in the Prime timeline. They don't actually get married. However, they do get together. They do have a child together, though Jean-Luc is not aware of this child until Picard Season 3. Spoilers for Picard Season 3, by the way. But if you're watching this video, I'm assuming you're all caught up on everything. So if you were just spoiled in Picard Season 3, that's your own fault. I mean, it came out months ago. Anyways, yeah, very similar. Very similar in that here they had gotten together and got divorced, and the Prime timeline they had gotten together, broke up, and had a kid together, but I don't think they actually got married. So I do like that. I do like that Picard Season 3 drew from this and made it better because they had more time to go more in depth with it. Not because it's bad here, but because this is just one episode. We get another humorous scene that I love here, where Beverly is telling him, hey, you should really get some rest, Jean-Luc, and he's like, no, I don't want to be led around, and I don't want to be patronized. And Beverly's like, okay, you're right. And then he goes, no, I'll go get some rest. Just the line delivery is so good. Patrick Stewart, very good in this episode, not only with his dramatic acting, but his comedic acting as well. As old Picard, he does a great job. Another reason I love this episode so much. Then we go back to the past timeline, the season 1 time period there, and Picard is desperately waiting for that big giant net that Q had put out in the Kenner Point to appear, and he's asking Counselor Troy, does she sense any presence? And he's like, Q, show yourself! And Worf goes to Tasha, what is a Q? And Tasha's like, it's a letter of the alphabet as far as I know. So the season 1 crew really starting to wonder what the hell is wrong with their captain, really starting to be suspicious of him and not sure if they trust him, which is something that will continue to play out as we move forward. So Picard, he says, I'll be in my ready room, but instead of going into his ready room, he ends up in that trial with Q, and Q comes floating in the chair just as he did an encounter at Farpoint, and we get the official reveal that this is Q who's behind it all. Now, this wasn't a surprise. I mean, we already saw like all those weird apocalyptic trial people going, and also, as I recall, when this episode aired, I think Q was in the trailer, so this wasn't any sort of surprise, but it is kind of the first reveal of the episode that, okay, yes, the confirmation, this is Q. So, and the episode did a really good job of building up to this point. And this is a really tense scene. Is really well earned. Really great scene, honestly. So it seems on the surface, Q is up to his old tricks. He's fucking with Picard again. But we'll eventually learn there's a little bit more to it than that. So Q tells Picard that he will answer 10 questions with a yes or no answer, and he's kind of being a dick with this. He's being way overly technical, where he tells Picard, well, you have 5 questions yet. No, I have 6. I only asked 4. Is it a Romulan plot? Is it a ploy to start a war? Those are 2 separate questions. No, they're not. They mean the same thing. He's being an asshole here. So he really is kind of fucking with Picard here. Q, however, does give a revelation to Picard and to the audience. He does reveal that he is responsible for the time shifts. Now, he does so by asking Picard to, or under the condition that Picard not tell anybody this answer. And then he says, yes, I am responsible for the time shifts. So he gives Picard the condition that you can't tell anyone. Picard, of course, immediately goes and tells everybody in the present timeline. It's one of the first things he tells them is that Q is responsible for it. But why not? I totally agree with Picard here. Like, fuck Q. Like, why would you go along with that? Why would you agree to that condition? Like, why would he be feel like he's committed to that condition, to that agreement, or Q is like fucking with him and telling him that 2 questions are really 1 question or actually 2 questions. And then when Picard asks the question that doesn't have a yes or no answer, he's like, you get no more questions. You forfeited all of your questions. So Q's being a dick. So yeah, of course, Picard should, by all rights, go and immediately tell everybody that Q is, in fact, responsible for his time shift. So I do not blame Picard at all for doing that. Now, but we're not quite done with this scene yet. Here, there's a couple more things. There's a scene where Q kind of just like gives a very, very brief summary of the 7 seasons of Star Trek The Next Generation from Q's point of view. You worrying about Riker's career, which was in my last video. You worrying about Riker's career, listening to Troy's pedantic psychobabble, indulging Data in his witless exploration of humanity. That's Q's summary of the 7 seasons of The Next Generation. Picard, has a counterpoint. Of course, no, we've done a lot of great exploration, blah, blah, blah. And Q says, it is time to put an end to your trek through the stars, which is, I think, the closest anyone's ever gotten to actually saying the word Star Trek. I mean, he does say the word trek through the stars, so he almost kind of says Star Trek. And I think that's the closest we've ever gotten in the show to someone actually saying Star Trek. A little too on the nose, but it's fine. But then again, Q's omniscient. Maybe he is fully aware that they're just characters in a TV show called Star Trek. Who knows? You never know. Anyway, now Picard returns to the present and assembles the senior staff to tell him about Q, and this is where he immediately tells them that Q is in fact causing the time shifts. And then Riker has lines of something along the lines of, maybe not acting is what causes the destruction of mankind. What if you're needed on the bridge at a key moment and weren't there? And then Troy counters with, I don't think we can start second guessing ourselves. I think we need to proceed normally. A little bit of a deja vu here for me, because this is exactly ripped out of Cause and Effect. There was a scene that was very similar. I think it was different characters who had those lines, but it was pretty much the same exact thing. I think, in fact, it was Riker in that case who said, we can't second guess ourselves. But it's the same thing. So I always notice that. It always stands out to me for some reason. Okay, now we jump back to the future time period again, and we meet future Worf for the first time. We learned that he is part of the Klingon government. He was in the Klingon High Council, though no longer, but he's the governor of some colony or whatever. So this is definitely way different than Picard season 3, where he's an operative for the Federation, and I definitely like Worf in Picard season 3 a lot better. In fact, Worf in Picard season 3 is one of my favorite parts of Picard season 3. He's so good in that season. And now that I'm trashing this here, not that there's anything wrong with this other than the whole Worf versus Riker thing that gets annoying, but this is just one interpretation of Worf's future, but I do kind of like what they did in Picard season 3. Worf is bitching about how Riker didn't help them. Like, of course he didn't help you. He doesn't have any honor. But then he doesn't help them either. And then Picard uses the honor trick to convince Worf, and Worf, throws a tantrum and throws his things off the table because he knows that Picard got him. And Picard's like, "Don't blame me for knowing you so well." It's so good. This is why this episode is good. This is the character interactions. This is real. This is tangible. This is actually how you can imagine Picard and Worf interacting in the future, even if this is not what ends up happening in our prime timeline with Picard. This is something that definitely fits, that makes sense, and that Picard knows Worf so well. I love this so much. Anyways, so Beverly tells the helm to set a course for the Deveron system at warp 13. See? You don't turn into salamanders when you go beyond warp 10. See proves it. Of course, this was written before Threshold, so you could say Threshold trumps this because it came out later, but no, I choose to believe this, even though this is an alternate timeline. We don't technically get warp 13 in the actual timeline. Still, you don't turn into salamanders. Anyways, go back into the past timeline again, where the crew is continuing to question Picard's weird orders. And then Picard goes and talks to Riker at Farpoint Station, and they pull footage from the season 1 episode, The Arsenal of Freedom, and they make it work. This is way before they had this de-aging technology and all that, and they couldn't, even if they made Riker shave his beard for a scene, he wouldn't look the same. So I like this choice to just go ahead and pull from Arsenal of Freedom, and they made it work. It's a little clunky, but it works. And then I love how he jumps right into Tomlock being hugely on the screen, going, "So, Captain, how long will we stare at each other across the neutral zone?" It's such a great transition. Again, getting back into the time jumping and the transitions, they're brilliant. And also a little moment of levity. And I'm glad they used Tomlock. Tomlock is probably... I don't think he was in too many episodes. He's probably the most common Romulan adversary in The Next Generation. So I love that they brought him back, and I love that scene. Stare at each other across the neutral zone! Anyways, so they do agree to send one ship each into the neutral zone, and Tomlock goes, "Did the Federation approve this?" "No." "Why, I like it already." And then they see that the anomaly is there. This is where we see that anomaly for the first time, and then Picard jumps into the past and realizes the anomaly is a lot bigger in the past than it is in the present timeline. Then he jumps into the future, and there's nothing there, which of course makes everyone think Picard is just losing their mind now, or his mind now. As audience watching this for the first time, this is a mystery. This is another great reason why this episode is great. We don't know what is happening. Wait, why is it not there in the future? I still don't think there's any doubt that Picard. Oh, maybe Picard really is. I don't think any audience member or whatever think that, but they are definitely sowing seeds of doubt into the characters, which is important because it makes it difficult for Picard to accomplish what he needs to get done. So that is all very well done. So we get a little confrontation here between Beverly and Picard. Again, Picard season 3 does this better, but also they had more time to flesh this out. This is just one episode. So Beverly finally confesses that she thinks there's a really good chance this is all in his head. And she tells him, if it were anyone else, I wouldn't be doing this. Then Beverly leaves, and then Q appears dressed up like an old man. And so this is the first time we see Q in the future timeline. And Picard, more humor with Jonathan Delancey this time. Picard asks him, where is the anomaly? And he goes, where's your mommy? Still continuing to fuck with him. And then we go into the present, where Picard suggests to Data to do the tachyon thingy that future Data had already come up with, and present Data is like, I had no idea you were so versed in temporal theory. And Picard's like, yeah, I have some friends who are, and of course he's referring to Data himself. And this is something that happens a couple times in this episode, and I kind of love that. I love how Data in different time periods is coming up with the same theories. Picard oftentimes has a jump on him because another version of Data has already told him. And there's a line actually later in this episode, not here, but later in this episode, where he says, Data, you're a clever man in any time period. And then we get back to the future again, where the Pasteur has now come under attack by the Klingons, only to be saved by the weird Enterprise D with 3 the cells. It looks so wacky. It's so silly. Of course, we know in the prime timeline, the Enterprise D has been destroyed, but then restored, and now it's in a museum that gets a big reveal at the end of Picard Season 3. Again, spoilers for Picard Season 3, but you should have already seen it. Anyways, so it looks silly. But in order for the plot to work, you needed an Enterprise D, because you're going to have 3 Enterprises at the end of this. So it's commanded by Admiral Riker, and also, that has a cloak, so I guess that makes sense. If there's no more Romulan Empire, it was the treaty with the Romulans that prevented them from having cloaks. So if there's no Romulan Empire, then sure, you can have a cloak now. Of course, in the prime timeline, there's no more Romulus, but there's still a Romulan Empire. So Worf and Riker get in this argument. I still have a sense of honor, and then blah blah blah, and very different than their really humorous interactions that they have in Picard Season 3, like where they really click. This is, and I talk about in this episode where characters really click. Again, the Worf and Riker thing is the one black mark on this episode. They don't click. Definitely not the way that they do in Picard Season 3. Okay, so then Picard goes back to the present, has a little conference, and after everyone leaves, Q confronts him again in the conference room, and he's telling Picard that he's got a big decision to make, and this must be a tough decision for you, but he's not really giving him any clarity until he says, hey, you know what? Let's have a little change of scenery. Perhaps this will make things a little more clear for you. And he takes Picard back to Earth 300 billion years earlier. So as much as Q has been fucking with Picard, he does kind of lead him to the correct answer, and he does want to kind of help him a little bit here. Now, this is really interesting because we see that the anomaly has now taken up all of space. And I remember the first time I saw this, I was like, oh, so it gets bigger the further back in the past you go. Before Picard said it, I got it first. That Picard does come to that realization. Interesting. The further back in time you go, the larger the anomaly is, which is such an interesting concept. So, once again, this whole time travel thing, this whole timey-wimey thing, is such an interesting concept, which is one of the reasons why I love this episode, but also the structure of the episode, the mystery, which I talked about earlier. I've seen it so many times that I often forget that it was a mystery, but when I first saw this, like trying to figure out what is going on, and as we get a new piece of information, it is really interesting. Like, it's really intriguing, really draws you in, and that's what happens here in this scene when you figure out that the anomaly is huge 300 billion years ago, so it gets bigger the further back in time you go. And this is where Q has a line as he's, showing Picard the building blocks of life, and he puts his hand in the goo and he says, "It all began right here in this little pond of goo." Like, he's got that Jonathan Delancey way of delivering that line. This little pile of goo. I love that. I didn't do it any justice. Don't listen to me. Go watch the episode again. Anyways, so this is where Picard puts it together that he caused the anomaly, and it is the anomaly that destroys life on Earth. And that's this whole thing. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier in the scenes. Q does tell Picard, "You were the cause of destroying life on Earth." And so now Picard is putting it together here. And I thought this is a really intriguing twist when I first saw it. Again, drawn and fascinating, interesting story. So then Picard jumps back into that past timeline from the first season, and past data comes up with the idea to use a tomographic imaging scanner, but he says it's theoretical right now. They just have it in the Daystrom Institute. They're working on it, but they don't have it yet. And then Picard jumps to the president and goes, "Data, do we have a tomographic imaging scanner on board?" He's like, "Well, yes, sir, we do." So I guess it didn't take him Daystrom Institute that long to put one on every ship. But so there we go. But again, Picard using things he gets from data in other timelines and telling the data of a different timeline, and I love it. So then we go into the future again, and we get this scene in 10 Forward where Riker is confronted by the other crew members about the whole Worf thing, and like, dude, when are you guys gonna quit this? This is ridiculous. And this is actually the first time that we get the reveal that Troy has passed away. When we hadn't seen her in the future timeline, this is the first time we get the reveal, and it's also a real reveal that Worf and Troy never really got together. And Worf had blamed Riker for that Riker had kind of got in the way. And I guess I got to talk about this Worf and Riker thing. I do feel like it came out of nowhere because I don't know. I feel like for the most part, Riker and Troy are kind of pretty well established as just being friends, and there's not really a whole lot of episodes that hint at maybe they'll get back together again. There is the one with the Thomas Riker in it, where Thomas Riker gets together with Troy, but it's not the same thing as that William Riker. That's the closest it gets, but for the most part, I don't feel like there's a lot of tension, like sexual tension, or like they just get settled into friendship. Now, of course, we do know that eventually they do get married, and they actually make a great married couple, very believable married couple in Picard seasons 1 and 3, and they get married back in Nemesis. So yes, eventually this does lead to something, but prior to this point, forget the movies and forget Picard. Prior to this point, I don't feel like that they went into it a whole lot. So when Worf was like, "Oh," at the beginning of this episode, he's like, "Oh, we've got to get Riker's permission." Like, why? I was with Troy. Like, why the fuck? Why? Like, he doesn't care anymore. But to say that he does care, I think kind of, I don't know, it felt a little contrived to me. And so, yeah, again, this is the black mark of the episode. Obviously does not keep it out of my top 5. Still one of the greatest episodes of all time. So, yeah, there's that whole thing. Um, now Picard goes to 10 forward. He enters 10 forward, and he's just begging Riker to help him because he has now figured out what they need to do. And Riker is not believing him, but Data to the rescue. Data is honestly Picard's biggest ally all throughout this episode. Good thing he didn't die in Nemesis. Good thing Nemesis didn't happen in this timeline. So he makes sense out of Picard's ramblings. And you know, and in the real time, in the prime timeline, it's Picard who kind of rescues Data in a way. So tables are turned here. I don't know that if I had the Jordy Crusher would now go along with it, but you know, whatever. Sure, what's a hand wavy thing? Sure. So they're trying to shut down the Tachyon beams in the other two time periods. It does not work, but future Data and Geordi come up with the solution to take the Enterprise into the anomaly using a static warp bubble, but they have to do it in the other two time periods as well. So, of course, in the season one time period, everybody's like, dude, what the fuck? And Tasha Yar is kind of the spokesperson for the crew who is like, you know, we have been going along with you, but you're going to put the ship in danger. We got to know why. And that's legit. And then Picard gives a speech and then convinces them because that's how good Picard's speeches are. Like, and I buy that he would convince them because Picard he gives good speeches. So it was a really good speech and it convinced them. So then we get to this big scene at the end where all three ships are inside of the anomaly. They all see each other, and I love how this is edited, how this is done, how Picard is jumping from one ship to the other very rapidly. It really revs up the tension. It's really exciting, really riveting. And then one of the Enterprises is destroyed. It's the past Enterprise is destroyed. The stakes are now higher. Things are getting really exciting. Then the second Enterprise, the present day Enterprise, is now destroyed. And then Q shows up. And earlier he said the title of the show, or a variation of the title of the show, The Trek Through the Stars. And now he says the title of the episode. Well, as they say, all good things must come to an end. Of course, the must come to an end is after the ... The title of the episode doesn't say all of it. And I wouldn't have been able to do my neat little picture clue if it was all good things must come to an end. But he does say the name of the episode. So then the last Enterprise that is left is the weird future Enterprise with the three nacelles. And we get this big flash of light. It's kind of ambiguous what has happened. And then Picard finds himself back in the courtroom with Q. So Q and Picard have this great, amazing conversation. Really wraps up the relationship between these two characters really nicely. It starts off with Picard going, "Is everything okay? What about my ship? What about my crew?" And Q is like, "Your ship, your crew. I suppose you're worried about your fish too." I love so good. Love those interactions. And John Delancey is just so good. He just nails it. I guess I got to talk about this. Because I did tease this earlier. I kind of do want to pretend that Star Trek Picard Season 2 doesn't exist. But this scene that I'm about to talk about is such the perfect ending for Q and Picard that we did not need these two characters to get back together again. And it does it well here. Picard Season 2 takes a big giant dump on this scene by just totally undermining it, by not having a scene as this one is where it Picard and Q's relationship are consistent with the way it's been. And Picard season 2, all of a sudden Q's like, "Oh, give me a hug." That is not Q. That is not Q. This right here is Q. The interactions that they have, where Picard says, "Thank you for helping me get out of this," and Q's like, "Well, I kind of was the one who got you into it. Well, it was the Continuum's idea, but the helping hand, that was me." But he does it in like he's helping Picard, but in a Q kind of way, in a way where he's still fucking with him. Whereas in Picard season 2, first of all, Q's like really angry at Picard for no reason, and then at the end, all of a sudden, he's like, "Give me a hug." Like, it doesn't make any sense. I like to pretend that scene didn't happen. This right here is the proper ending between Q and Picard. Let's just pretend that bullshit in season 2 Picard didn't happen. Anyway, so now Picard is taken back in time to the beginning of the episode where he approaches Worf and Troy, and turns out none of that shit ever happened, and Picard's the only one who maintains memories of this. And then we get the final scene with the poker game, and they're all sitting around, they're talking about how Picard told him about the future, and Data's like, "Well, it's weird that he told us about the future," or no, not Data, I think it was Crusher, sorry. It was like, "It's weird that he told us about the future, because when that," or maybe it was Geordi, whoever it was, somebody. I really did just watch this episode last night. Anyway, they're like, "It's weird that he told us about the future because wouldn't that ruin the timeline?" And here's where Data is the one who points out, "Well, since the anomaly never occurred, then things have already changed. So therefore, that is an alternate timeline. So we can still make our own future, or the writers can still make their own future, a future in which Romulus is destroyed, Data gets killed, and Worf and Riker and Troy get married, and Worf is an agent of the Federation, and that's the new future." So they really opened the door to have more projects and to do whatever they wanted, and didn't have to be locked into this future of all good things, because they say right here, "Hey, that's an alternate timeline." And so then this is where Picard walks into the room, and this is the great scene. Such a great scene, where Picard says, "I should have done this a long time ago." And I'm like, "You were always welcome." And the way that the camera pans out, they're all playing cards, and Picard is like, "No wilds, and the sky's the limit." So good. With all the characters together around that poker table. And the thing that makes it so perfect is that their adventures are going to continue. Like, this isn't like they all go off on different ships, and Riker gets his own command or anything like that. They're all still going to be together. We know this isn't the end of it, but it's the end of our time watching them, at least in television form, at least for a while. So it is such the perfect ending. I think the only other show that comes close is probably The Expanse, if we're going to assume they're not doing any more Expanse shows, the way that ends, because it's so character focused and ties everything up nicely, and focuses on the characters, and that's what makes it great. Although I don't think The Expanse finale is anywhere near as good as this, but the end part is good. But I also like that they point out, Worf and Riker are like not going to do that dumb thing. So we're opening the door for something different. But anyways, this is such a great ending. Such a great ending. Now, I do have to talk about Picard season 3, because I definitely have heard the opinion that is repetitive because they do the poker table thing again. I think that Picard season 3 is not repetitive, and I think they needed to do that ending again, because this ending kind of gets fucked up by the movies. So if there were no movies, you wouldn't need the Picard season 3. But because there are movies, you did need that Picard season 3 ending. I'm glad they redid the poker table, because this is like, fuck that scene was like, fuck the movies. No, this is how it ends. They ends with the poker table. Now we're ending it for real. So they can't do anything else with these characters. Just stop it. Just end with the freaking poker game. Just stop doing more stuff. If you know my channel, you know how I feel about the movies. I think they're all bad. Yes, even First Contact, I think, is the most overrated movie of all time. It is not a good film. I think that's where the Borg goes completely downhill. They changed the character of the Borg with this Borg Queen nonsense, and their whole plot to travel back in time is convoluted. And Insurrection, I don't really remember. I should probably watch it again sometime, just because it's been so long. And Nemesis sucks. Generation is actually my favorite movie, but it's not a great movie either. So the films kind of ruined this ending. So yes, we did need Picard season 3 to come back and do it again because of the stupid movies. But just looking at this as an ending to the show, not for the characters, but for the show, magnifique, perfection, perfect, best ending of all time. Okay. So we have reached the end of this recap of a 2-hour-long episode. So as I alluded to earlier, I'm not going to do 2-hour episodes anymore. The top 3 are all 1-hour episodes. So I don't know if that means my videos will be shorter or if I'll just have more to talk about. I don't know. So what's coming up next as we go into November for my picture clue video for number 3, and then my video for number 3, then the picture clue for number 2, and then my video for number 2, and we will wrap up November with number 2, and then we will save number 1 for December for the end of the year. We're almost there, everyone. Getting closer. Please watch all of my previous Star Trek Top 100 videos. If you enjoyed this one, please subscribe if you have not already. And I shall see you all really, really soon. Check out my Lower Decks reviews. We've got 2 more episodes left. I will see you real soon, everybody. Goodbye.